Life hasn't always been easy for popes. Many early popes were martyred by the Romans before Constantine found he could use the church for his own ends and formalised it as the new state religion. Others were murdered during political intrigues. John I was starved to death while imprisoned by the Ostrogoth king Theodoric in 526. John VIII was killed by his own clerics, who lusted for political power. In 882 he was poisoned and clubbed to death. Stephen VI is chiefly remembered for the Cadaver Synod, where his predecessor, Formosus, was dug up from his grave and the corpse put on trial, found guilty, and mutilated before being thrown into the river Tiber. A few months after this unusual legality, Stephen was strangled to death in 897. The 10th century was tough on popes. Leo V was deposed after a reign of 2 months in 903, and was possibly murdered either by his successor, Christopher, who is now considered an anti-pope rather than a legitimate pope, or Christopher's successor, Sergius III, who had Christopher killed in 904. John X was deposed by Roman nobles, who were the real power behind the Vatican at this time. He was thrown into a dungeon and either smothered with a pillow or died of neglect there in 928. John XII, son of a nobleman, became pope in his early 20s, and possibly the least papal pope ever. He survived an attempt by the German Emperor Otto to depose him, and retaliated by mutilating some of his enemies in 964. A few months later he was dead, however. It was said an outraged husband caught him in bed with the man's wife, and so the man beat the offending pope to death. Or, it is said he suffered a stroke while engaged amorously with the wife. Benedict Ix was overthrown by Roman nobles in 974 and replaced with Boniface VII. When Benedict's German patrons demanded Boniface step down, he instead ordered a priest to strangle Benedict to death. Boniface took a vast treasure and fled to Byzantium, but he was back a decade later and in 984 murdered his second pope, casting John XIV into prison, where he either starved or was poisoned. Boniface too died suddenly and may have been poisoned. When he died in 985, the populace of Rome showed their thoughts about this pope by dragging his corpse through the streets until it was stripped naked and left laying in front of the Lateran palace until the following morning, when it was retrieved and buried. Gregory V, a member of the German royal family, was made pope at the age of 24 in 996. He and his cousin, the Emperor Otto III, dealt with a rival pope, John XVI, following a rebellion in 998, by having John blinded, his ears and nose cut off, his tongue torn out, and his fingers broken. He was then led past them sitting backwards on a donkey in humiliation. Rebuked for their cruelty, Otto and Gregory sent the mutilated anti-pope away to a monastery, where he died about 3 years later. Gregory himself died in 999, aged about 27. It was suspected he died of unnatural causes. Other popes have died in mysterious circumstances which may indicate they were murdered, but with so many conflicting and agenda-driven narratives surrounding the papacy, it is often difficult to know the truth. Clement II was born Swidger of Bamberg in Saxony around 967, the son of Count Conrad of Morsleben and Hornburg, and his wife Amelrad. Due to the chaotic state of the papacy in the 11th century, he found himself declared pope in 1046. His reign was brief and the manner of his death remains clouded. Swidger's path to the triple tiara was forged by the machinations of Roman nobles in the 11th century. The Counts of Tusculum, who had been the power behind the papal throne since the time of Sergius III, had eventually treated the papacy as an inheritance. John XI was the son of Sergius and Marozia, the daughter of Count Theophylact. John XII was a grandson of Marozia through another of her sons. A cousin became Benedict VII. One of her great-great-grandsons became Benedict VIII in 1012, and was succeeded by his brother as John XIX in 1024. John in turn was followed by his nephew Benedict IX in 1032. Benedict IX had a brother who tried to be pope as Benedict X in 1058, but is considered an anti-pope. Benedict IX was only about 20 years old or younger when he became pope, and was one of the worst of all time. Even his election was achieved by his father, Alberic, through bribery. Benedict's tenure was marked by scandal. The Tusculum family's power was beginning to wane, and enemies would smear his reputation, so how bad he is uncertain, although he was accused of many acts of violence and murder. Believed to be bisexual, he was accused of sodomy and rape as well. Benedict was briefly ousted from Rome in 1036, but regained power with the help of the German Emperor Conrad II. A more serious ouster occurred in 1044, when he was forced out and a new pope elected in the figure of Sylvester III, a man from a rival noble family. Benedict regained his position in 1045, but doubted he could keep it. He was also desirous of marrying his cousin, so after just a month of being back on the job, he sold the papacy, the only pope to have ever done so. The purchaser was his godfather, who became Gregory VI. Soon Benedict missed the office and returned to be pope. Gregory VI, however, considered he was still the pope, and Sylvester III made a return bid as well. In 1046, such was the debacle that a number of clergy and others implored the German Emperor Henry III to intervene. He convened 3 synods to adjudicate. At the second, the Council of Sutri, in December 1046, Sylvester was exiled to a monastery, and Gregory resigned his claim. Benedict did not attend the council, but was likewise removed from papal office at the third synod, held in Rome. Henry's confessor, Suiger of Bamberg, was offered the papacy after Adalbert, a German archbishop, prudently refused it. Having accepted it, Suiger was crowned pope on Christmas Day, 1046, taking the name of Clement II. Henry was crowned Holy Roman Emperor the same day. The majority of Clement's time as pope was taken up travelling through Italy and Germany with Henry, although he did pass some reforms during this time, including decrees which improved the state of the Church's governance. On his way back to Rome, Clement died at the monastery of St. Thomas di Foglia, near Pesaro, Italy, on the 9th of October, 1047, having been pope for 9 months and 16 days. His body was taken back to Bamberg for burial, being the only pope buried north of the Alps. It was rumoured that Clement had been poisoned, and there were those with cause to assassinate the pope. As soon as the death of the pope was known, Benedict IX seized the Lateran palace and was not expelled by German soldiers until 1048. It was not until the 20th century that the rumours were proved true. Samples from Clement's body, some hair, dried tissue, a rib, and some of his clothing were exhumed from his stone coffin and tested in 1959. Clement had been buried in fine clothing, but in 1942 the remains were taken from the tomb and stored in a place of safety, lest they be destroyed by bombing during World War II. Clement's remains were returned to the tomb in 1947, but the vestments and his buskins, a type of high lace-up boot, were kept for preservation. Higher than normal levels of lead were found in the skeletal remains. The rib held 50 parts per million, levels only seen during the Industrial Revolution, when contamination was at its worst. In Western countries in the 21st century, an adult would likely only have 5 parts per million in their bones. The lead was shown to have been absorbed during life and not while in the sarcophagus, because there was no lead detected in the clothing samples. When the human body absorbs lead, it concentrates it in the bones as a defence against poisoning. Due to this, dependent upon the amount of lead a person is exposed to, the poisoning can be gradual, over a number of months or years. While it is rare for a single dose to be toxic, lead salts have a sweet taste, which could aid their acceptance by a victim in one large dose. Lead is toxic due to it being able to replace other metals in the human body, such as calcium, zinc and iron, in biochemical reactions with protein molecules, causing them to be unable to function properly. Problems with anemia, renal failure, and high blood pressure can result from lead poisoning. When lead replaces calcium, it impedes the transmission of electrical impulses in the brain, potentially causing headaches and mental confusion. Abdominal pain and tingling in the hands and feet are common symptoms of lead poisoning. More severe cases may involve vomiting, muscle weakness, and the victim may lapse into a coma. Lead in the form of dust is more readily absorbed by the body than lead which is ingested. The question, though, was whether the poison was administered maliciously or whether death was accidental. Other heavy metals which are toxic have been used because of supposed health benefits over the years, especially mercury. It is possible Clement was exposed to the lead in a medicine. White lead was also commonly used in cosmetic products. A more likely source, however, is the use of lead as a sweetener. Lead acetate, also known as lead sugar, was used by the Romans as a means to sweeten their wine. Other than honey, they had few options or were unaware of the medical harm lead caused. Grape juice was boiled down in lead pots to create a syrup, which was mixed with wine. German wine continued to be sweetened in this manner for centuries, not outlawed until the 18th century. Clement was known to be fond of the wine from his homeland, importing it to Rome during his brief term there. The amount of lead necessary to be fatal is 1 to 3 milligrams per day for 3 months, or 5 to 10 milligrams per day for a month, amounts which could have easily been slipped into the Pope's wine unnoticed by an assassin. While it will never be known if Clement was deliberately poisoned, there were those who had motive and an utter lack of morals to do so at the heart of the Roman Church. Damasus II, another German pope backed by Henry III, took office on the 17th of July 1048 and died on the 9th of August 1048, one of the shortest papal reigns. Again it was rumoured he too had been poisoned. Gerhard Brazutus, a friend of Benedict IX, was accused, but there was no method of proving guilt. Damasus could have died from contracting malaria. Whether or not they were intentionally killed, the life of a medieval pope was far from secure and provides some of the strangest events in the dark corners of history.